Hello, thank you all for logging on today. My name is Paloma Lopez, and I am an educator at the Indian Arts Research Center. I am pleased to be joining you from the School for Advanced Research, which is located on traditional lands of the Tewa people, Ogopogo Winge or White Shell Water Place, also known as Santa Fe, New Mexico. Surrounding our campus are the landscapes of Pueblo, Apache, and Navajo communities, whose people continue to maintain vital connections to this place. As an institution privileged to steward Indigenous cultural material and committed to uplifting Indigenous voices, we strive to maintain respectful and mutually beneficial relationships with these communities. We not only honor the ancestral stewards of this land, but celebrate their past, present, and future. Today's discussion is the final of 4 events in this year's Indian Arts Research Center speaker series, 100 years later, the Indian Arts Research Center and the role of collections in the 21st century. A recording of this event will be made available to view on our YouTube channel in the coming days. Recordings of the previous events in this series are already available to view. At this point, I would like to turn things over to Jennifer Day to introduce herself and to get things started.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Day, and I am the head registrar here at the Indian Arts Research Center. I've been with SAR since 2005, and I work in such daily activities as managing new acquisitions, managing our database, our collections management database, and also handling outgoing loans for exhibition to other institutions and rights and reproductions for publications. I also work with the Collections Review Project, which is what we'll be discussing today. And next, I would like to introduce Mark Mitchell, who will be speaking with us today.
Hello, my name is Mark Mitchell. I'm a former governor from the Pueblo of Tesuque and the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. I'm also a lifetime member of the Tesuque Tribal Council. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Next, we'd like to introduce Octavius Sotowa from Zuni, Pueblo.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Octavius Seowtewa. I'm from Zuni, and I'm the supervisor for the Zuni Cultural Resource Advisory Team. And I had the pleasure of working with SAR and Jennifer a couple years back. And thank you for inviting me. Glad to be a part of this discussion. Thank you.
Great. And now we'd like to introduce Stephanie Riley, the registrar for cultural projects here at IARC.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Riley. I'm the registrar for cultural projects at the Indian Arts Research Center. I've been with SAR since 2017. My primary job is facilitating and coordinating the collection review projects. Prior to SAR, I was with the Sky City Cultural Center and Haku Museum, where I also participated, where I participated as a participant for the Acoma collection reviews. So I'll be speaking to both sides of this project.
Great. Next, Stephanie and I will be introducing the Collections Review Project with a PowerPoint presentation that we usually give to participants the first time that they come to visit the IARC, and we talk with them about what the project consists of and what to expect and what expectations they have regarding the project as well. First of all, I'll start with a brief overview with IARC. We always like to introduce our participants to the institution so they understand who we are and what we do. That we're a division of the School for Advanced Research, which is located here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and that our research collection is approximately 12,000 items of Southwest Native American art. We're not an exhibiting institution. We do have intern-produced displays and small exhibitions, but we don't have general tours in the way that most museums do. So yeah, we are more of a research oriented institution. And our range of programs reflects that. We have internships, artist fellowships. We do tours of the collection on certain days of the week. research visits. We have object loans to other institutions who would like to borrow items for exhibition. And we also manage a number of image requests for publication. Our purpose is to foster dialogue among community members, artists, and scholars through collaborative projects and seminars and symposia. Next, we like to provide some background for the history of the Zuni, Acoma, Tesuque, Pueblo, and Isleta collection review projects. We've had the pleasure of working with 4 Pueblos so far, and we're going to be starting with a 5th fairly soon as well. We started this project in 2009 with Zuni Pueblo and completed that in around 2017. They had about 1,100 objects in their collection, so it took about 8 years to complete that project. In Acoma, we started the Acoma project in 2015 and completed it in 2019. They have approximately 600 objects in their collection. So again, that did take a few years to complete. The Tesuque project began in 2019 and completed in June 2021. So that was just about a year ago. Seems like it was just a few days ago. And we started with Isleta Pueblo in March of this year. Every Pueblo chooses to work with chooses different people to work with the IARC on the project. Zuni Pueblo chose 2 cultural advisors that were appointed by the Pueblo, and that included Octavius, who is with us today, and also Jim Enote. Acoma chose to work with the Haku Museum staff and also several potters who were chosen to participate because most of their collection was pottery, so it made sense to have potters participating in the project. Tesuque worked with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, including Mark, who's also with us today, of course, and the participants that were selected by him and other members of the TIPO office. And Isleta Pueblo, who we just began working with, chose volunteers for the reviews through their Yanoan Cultural Center. Sorry, I think I said that wrong. And we always begin by explaining our goals for the project because we want to be very transparent regarding what our goals are for the project, and also to come to understand what the participating community's goals are as well. So our first goal is to systematically review IARC's entire collection of participating communities' objects, and we're going through that Pueblo by Pueblo and community by community. We want to make corrections to inaccuracies in the record. We also want to add interpretive and appropriate cultural information that's agreed upon by the project participants. We definitely do not want to be sharing any information that the participants don't want shared. So when we come across information like that, we're very careful to clarify what should and should not be added to the record. We want the members to feel comfortable with what goes into our database, and we also want the world to know whatever they would like people to know about their items. We want to establish guidelines that will inform IARC staff regarding appropriate access for research visits, publication, housing, and handling, to make sure that we're providing the most respectful treatment of each item as possible. And we also want to build a strong partnership between SAR and the participating communities via open communication and collaboration, which we hope will continue on past this project as well. The process of setting up for reviews looks like what you see in these pictures here. In the picture on the right, we see where IARC staff has placed a selection of items out on the table for that day. And in front of each piece is a collections database report that has all of the information that we know about that piece all in one place, so that we can review each object as we go and let the participants know what is known about that piece, and then we can begin discussing it and adding to the record. This is the part that we call the physical review. We add new info to the records and make corrections, as I mentioned before. And we also we tape record and take pictures during this process, so that we can use pictures and presentations such as this, and tape recordings, if the community agrees to that, are used so that Stephanie can make can do her work in transcribing the session into notes that can go into the database. After those notes have been added to the database, we do the data review portion, which is where we go back with those notes that have been added to the database to make sure that we got everything right and that everyone is on the same page about the information that we've included. Okay. And here are some pictures of all of us working on the reviews. We see Octavius in one of those pictures, and he's looking with Jim Eno at a particular pot. And we have some of the Acoma participants over on the top left, and they're all examining a pot with tools that we provide, such as the magnifying glasses and other items that we make available for a thorough inspection of all of the items in the review. And down in the lower right-hand corner, we see an artist who's actually looking at one of her pieces. She was from the Tesuque, the Isleta review, that's Stella Teller, and she's examining one of her own pieces, which was very interesting to experience with her. Okay, Steph. And here's some more examples of the types of tools that we make available. As I mentioned, we do record sessions if the participants are amenable to that. Here we're making a small video about jewelry, the Zuni jewelry, and Octavius and Jim are wearing special magnifying glasses for looking at jewelry. And we've also got all kinds of flashlights available and pointing tools, and we make gloves available and everything that's necessary for to make a thorough examination of all of the items for the reviews. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, and she's going to take over the last half of the presentation.
All right, so this slide is just showing how we were able to adapt to COVID policies during the pandemic. We did incorporate Zoom, so we ended up using a hybrid format type of collection review. If you'll see in the upper left photo, we have our camera set up with Jen and Larry during one of the Tesuque collection reviews. And on the bottom right photo is all some of our Zoom participants, which was mostly our staff who were taking notes at the time. Our priority was safety, and so we're still adapting as times are still in the pandemic. And so some examples of things we may learn during a collection review include new catalog information that the participants would like to see in the records, cultural context to better explain content. This includes things like if it's a storage jar, what type of things were stored in that jar, a water jar, if it was actually used to carry water. We correct any inaccuracies that are noted. This is usually things like item names. Clarification on certain terminologies. We can also have the records be a source community glossary by including native languages or native language words into the records, and any new information that we have not considered yet. So during each project, we always come across something that is culturally sensitive. And when we do, we consider any special care and restrictions, or if that object may need to be repatriated. At this point, the community can define the care or restrictions that each item needs, should it stay in our collection or until it can be repatriated. And we track this information where it can be easily found in our records and respect the instructions that are provided. And all our repatriation claims are handled according to the NAGPRA process. This is an example of what our records look like during a collection review. As Jen mentioned, all the records for the objects that will be reviewed during that session are printed out. and I take notes directly to that record, and any staff that are present will also take notes. And I gather everybody's notes and I combine them into cohesive entries. So this is an example of what our updated record will look like. The section in the outlined in blue is the tribal collection review remark. This is where we add any new catalog information and cultural information. The section that is outlined in green is the tribal instructions section. And this is a quick reference for our staff to see how to treat each item. This includes things like restrictions on access, publication restrictions, any type of special handling considerations, and special storage considerations. So what do we do with all this information? As I mentioned, 80% of my job is typing up these entries, and this is the longest phase of the project. Once I complete all of this, we bring the participants back for a data review. And so we go back through each record and look at everything that I've added. And this is to ensure that I've accurately interpreted the remarks and new catalog information, and ensure that everyone agrees on what is now on the record. And we also encourage community representatives to share these new entries with anyone at home in their own community, just to allow discussion and bring that information back should any of the records need to be changed. And this also gives times for the participants to consider any difficult items. Some eventual uses are for our staff to ensure proper access, handling, and storage, and for use by community members, artists, and researchers. Also for use in improving content of our online catalog, e-museum. However, we will never put anything that is culturally sensitive online. During our collection reviews, we also have our participants sign a photo and recording release form. And this is a way for our staff to track permissions granted for use of photos for SAR and IRC use. For our photos, we primarily use our photos for PowerPoint presentations, such as this one, grant reports, scholarly presentations, social media posts, and this just helps us explain our programs to various audiences. Should the group that we're working with decide that they want to do an audio or video recording, this is primarily just to ensure accuracy of information as I'm entering it into the database. And we only photograph or record portions of the session that the participants are comfortable with. So they're allowed to ask us to shut off any recording devices at any moment if they don't wish to have that on record. Here are some examples of some of the uses of our photos. On the left, we have a social media post, and on the right, we have a presentation. Sorry, my son is coming down the hallway and he's very much into dinosaurs, so you may hear him from time to time. Okay, well, I have a dinosaur in the room, but well, we hope this project serves both parties. We want to make our records a better resource for both IRC and the community that we're working with. And we want to ensure that all of the IRC collection items are treated in a culturally appropriate and respectful manner. We also want to build a relationship that will extend beyond this collection review project by opening an ongoing and enduring dialogue. And nothing is set in stone. The records are like layers and can always be added to in the future.
All right, at this time, we would like to move into some questions for our panelists. Questions for the group. And I'd like to start with Octavius. Why did your community agree to participate in the collections review, and what did you hope to gain from it? Oh, Octavius, you're on mute still.
Right, okay. Done a lot of museum artifact reviews, the Field Museum, natural history, but this one started out a little different. We were actually given the option, given the choice of how we wanted to do it. And it wasn't just like a 3-day review. And I think that was really important because some of the items that we chose or we talked about really went into detail of especially the pottery, the designs. And when it came to carvings, we identified the artist and what material was used and what it represents. And then the jewelry section, I'm a silversmith too, so I knew a little about making jewelry. And we talked in detail about the artist, how it was made, like mosaic or petit point, needlepoint, cluster, nuggets, all these went into that information. And this was the start of a whole new review. Like I said, the other museums had items that they wanted us to see, but didn't give us a chance to look at all the items that they had. And because this was a 9-year project, that we had the chance to look at everything that SAR had. And Jim and I went into a lot of detail, a lot of information. And I think that's what museum collection reviews should be like. And I use SAR as an example to the Smithsonian and the Field Museum, Natural History, and Denver Art Museum, Denver Nature and Science, all these museums that have items that came from Zuni. Instead of giving us just a couple of days, we had a chance to really go into detail, and I think that was what was really important. And what had us doing it for Zuni was that Jim Eno was the director for Oshawa Museum, and he had close contact with SAR and invited me, because I'm the advisory team supervisor, to help him with the review. And just like everything else, it started out slow, but after the first review of what we talked about, what we wanted out there, came got a lot easier. And as the project went, we had to go back and change some of that information. And I think that's what museum artifact review should be like, instead of giving us a day or two just to look at the items and not really go into detail about what they are, because some of that information is not accurate. And, we, as the source community of these items, that we want to put the accurate information. So it was a project that really helped me with what I'm doing now with other museums. And like I said, I use SAR as an example of how it should be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Octavius. And Mark, are you there? All right. Maybe you'd like to field that question as well. And if you'd like me to repeat it, just let me know.
Please repeat. That was
Okay. Why did your community agree to participate in a collections review, and what did you hope to gain from it?
First and foremost, our community wanted to, again, really look at what collections School of Advanced Research had, and making sure that, again, one, the information was accurate. What we hope to get out of it was, one, if possible, to find the name of the individual or individuals that made the pottery. And then secondly, and most importantly, was to make sure that some of the designs that were on these pots are truly Tesuque related, which as we went through the process, there were some designs on the pots that were truly from Tesuque Pueblo. And we were hoping to make sure, or hoping to get our students in there so that they too can look at the collections and what have you, and know that there are actual Tesuque people that made the pottery, and do have I guess a dialogue, and know that they are related in some way, shape, or form to the current day students. So that was the reason why we did it, and that was the reason what we got out of it, and we hope to continue working closely with you all as things go on. And it's just not the pottery. There's also paintings and other things that we relate it to as well. So that was good.
Thank you, Mark. And Stephanie, since you were involved with Acoma at that time as the organizer on the other side of getting all of the participants organized, can you speak to that as well?
Sure. I think we agreed to the project because we knew it would serve as a valuable resource in the end. And we were really interested in just taking potters up to see all the pottery that they've only really seen in books. And so that was one of our primary reasons to agreeing. And also we really wanted to learn from the potters as we were looking, as we were going to be looking at different pottery styles, which was what ended up happening. And it was a really great process.
Thank you, Stephanie. Our next question, and this time I'd like to start with Mark, is what was the process like for choosing who from your community would participate in a collections review? How did you choose who would participate?
Okay, so at the very beginning, or at the very onset of all this, when we first received that information, our process here at the Pueblo is that we don't do anything without the approval of governor and council. So they kind of gave that direction back to the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. So our part was to seek out those that will be willing to go in, and potters and elders that are willing to go in to sit and look at all the items and the pots and what have you. There was quite a few at the time, and as time was getting closer, due to whatever their personal agendas and schedules were, almost half of them dropped out because of other reasons. So we had to redo the whole thing. And then once we had those folks identified, then we have a two-part process. One was to go before the advisory committee of the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. And once they approve that, then we finally take it to tribal council, governor and tribal council, and then they sanction that and approve it. So there's several steps before anything we can do as Tesuque people before we even are allowed to be a part of stuff like this. And that goes for everybody here. So if they're doing it out of not with the permission of council, they're kind of frowned upon, because we don't know how things are or what's going on in those arenas. But that's our process, and we were satisfied with that. And again, we were wanting to make sure that those that had to drop out, we would want to circle back with those guys if there was another another event that's going to happen, that we will bring them and at least give an opportunity for everyone to be a part of. So that was our role.
Thank you. And Stephanie, how could you answer that as well?
Yeah. So like you mentioned, the Acoma collection at IRC is primarily ceramics. And so initially we brought on who we were calling master potters. I know they don't like to be called that because they always say, oh, I'm still learning. And but that was a group of people, some older women that we had decided to bring, who had been making pottery for years and were well known for pottery making. As we had gotten a year or two into the project, we incorporated younger potters, male potters, and this just being to get everyone's perspective. We incorporated younger potters to in hopes that they would have questions that maybe I wasn't asking, or the other museum staff person who participated wasn't asking, just so we can kind of get a feel for what maybe younger potters might want to know from this project as well.
Thank you. And Octavius, how did you and Jim come to be involved in the project?
Well, like I mentioned, Jim, at that time, who was the director of the Oshawa Museum. And I worked pretty closely with him on other issues too, other projects. And he invited me to be a part of the review, but with the, we have a tribal resolution. Actually, we have 3 resolutions that gives the advisory team to be the voice for cultural issues here and off the reservation. So with that, I became a participant in looking at the items in SAR. And so Jim and I started that project, and we stayed with the project for 9 years until it was completed. And we thought we were done until somebody donated over 100 turtles that came in. And so we had to identify the artists and what material was used. And so I think Jim, having a lot of information about pots from his grandmother, and like I said, I'm a silversmith, so I knew some of that, the work that takes to produce jewelry. And we looked at pottery, textiles, paintings, carvings, and jewelry. And it was always a pleasure, and we had a good time, because every visit was different. It wasn't didn't get monotonous. It was interesting working with all the items that are there, and 1,100 items in 9 years, and took time. But like I said, I think the information that we provided is information that we are very satisfied with the public getting that information and having the accurate information coming from, like I said, the source community. So that's how we started the project with the participants, and with Jim's connection to SAR, that went quite well with us, and information that we provided is information that we want there for the general public. Thank you.
Thank you, Octavius. All right, so now we can go on to our next question, which is, what was the review process like? How did you go about reviewing the pieces attributed to your community? And did you learn anything surprising along the way? Stephanie, would you like to start this time?
Sure. the review process overall in general was really great. It was a great experience. Everyone was always excited to come to the collection review. While we were still doing this project, the participants would always ask, when's the next collection review? When's the next collection review? And I think just being able to see all the objects in front of you and just to be able to hold them was what was really made the experience just amazing for all the potters. Being able to feel the insides of the pots and talk about the different coiling methods or how maybe that jar was built was really great. And I know like 60% of the time the participants were speaking in Keres in Acoma, which was nice for me because I'm still learning Acoma to this day. And it was really nice to learn different terminologies, how to describe the heaviness of a pot, or how to say if it's really light, or the busyness of a design, or even just learning different design elements while we were looking at the different jars in the collection. And I think the 5 years we spent in this project, we all kind of ended up as a big family at the end, which was, is still one of my favorite parts about the collection review projects, is kind of this feeling of family that you get after spending 2 days or a full day with people talking pottery or textiles or paintings, just learning the cultural context of all the objects. And I think all of that just makes this whole process a really great experience.
Yeah, I would just like to reiterate, I think what you said, Stephanie, about that feeling of family that we have by the end of each review. I think that's probably the most rewarding aspect of this project for me, is just getting to know new individuals and having that feeling of camaraderie that develops over time, and through the sharing of meals and new details about the items that we're looking at. I think that's for me has been one of the most personally rewarding parts of the project. And Octavius, how about you? What surprising things did you learn during the reviews, or what was it like to look at 1,100 objects over 9 years? Oh, you're on mute again, Octavius.
Okay, sorry. Finding a painting that my grandfather painted, a couple of them, and my late father, Alex Seowtewa, is the artist for the Old Mission, and I knew that my father always talked about his father's paintings. I never saw one before until I got to SAR, and he used a different name instead of Charlie Chuyat. His paintings were signed Patton Chuyat, and I wasn't too sure, but the last name kind of made sense. But I came home and asked my father, and he said that that's the name he used to sign most of his paintings. And so when I saw that, it was an eye-opening for me, because I know how my father's paintings are really great, and then finding my grandfather's painting equal to my father's. So finding something like that was really gratifying. And I took photos of the painting and showed it to my father. And he never saw those paintings before too. So it was also an eye-opening for him too, to see one of his father's artwork. So just little things like that really made this project really gratifying, to find something like that, and of all things to be working there. And it took, I don't know how many, 4 years before we got into the paintings, and I didn't know it was there until I actually saw it. So it's comes full circle of the talent that my late father had, and now my grandfather had that same talent. And I have a different talent of making jewelry, but just finding that really was an eye-opening, gratifying experience for me. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next we wanted to just each speak about particular pieces in the collection that spoke to us while we were taking a look through some of the items in the collection reviews. So Stephanie, do you have that presentation again?
Yes, let me pull it back up.
All right, I'll start out with a jar that, a water jar made by Jesse Garcia from Acoma, Pueblo. This is a piece that I've always really admired when I see it sitting on the shelf in the vault. I was always kind of curious about it because it's not a traditional pot in that it hasn't entirely been filled in with designs. And I was always curious about why it was like that. And during the review process, when I was doing data entry prior to the review sessions to get all that information available, I learned that the donor, who was Sally Wagner, visited Jesse Garcia at some point around 1967, and she asked her to just leave this pot as it was. I guess she saw it with the lines on it and asked her to just fire it as it was. And I've always just really admired the clean lines and the spare feeling of this pot. And so when we got to this one with the Acoma participants, they were all just kind of puzzled by this piece and wondered, like, well, why didn't she finish it? Like, what happened here? And so I told them the story of how the donor had asked her to just stop and fire the pot as it was. And so that explained it for them, but they were still kind of puzzled by that choice of why someone would want an Acoma pot that wasn't all filled in. And so to me, it just really illustrates just different expectations that different people have when looking at different artworks. And, you know, hearing the community participants' point of view on that was really interesting for me, that they were puzzled by the very things that I admired about this pot. And it was just neat to see the different points of view on it. So I always think of that story when I see this piece on the shelf. So next I'll turn it over to Octavius.
Okay, this piece here, there aren't too many pots like this. And when I first saw it, I've seen one like this. A friend of mine had purchased it and wanted to get information about the designs on it, because usually Zuni pottery has the medallion, a flower medallion with rainbirds, overlapping water designs. This one is really unusual because the way it is sitting right now, it's hard to identify what it is. But if you flip it around and put the open end, then you can see the back that's painted on this pot. And like I said, there aren't too many of these around. And we tried to research the artist because this same pot is identical to the one that my friend bought. And it has the same designs on it, but it's very difficult to make a determination of who the artist was. Now, these pots are not too many around, so it was good that SAR had this pot because, like I said, there aren't too many of them around. If you flip it around, you can see the wings and the whole the head on the back. So that's why I was really interested in this one, because like I said, I saw one like this before in the past, and I wanted to put that information out about this particular pot. So
Thank you.
that I like this one.
All right. And next up, I believe, is Stephanie.
All right, I chose this jar just because I just really like this jar. I just love looking at it. It makes me really happy. While we were looking at this jar during the Acoma reviews, I was curious as to why, why the birds weren't outlined. And a lot of it just came down to, it was just whoever, the artist's choice. And it was really unusual in that the deer is orange. Typically, the deers on our jars are brown or black. But I just really love the way the artists painted their deer on this and the birds. And this jar was actually replicated by Rose Chino later on, which I do believe we have in the collection also. But I believe this is like one of the jars. While we were looking at it, everyone was just like, yeah, it's cute. It's cute. Which, it just makes me really happy. Something about this jar just makes my day sometimes.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. And Mark.
So when I first got to the School of Advanced Research and walked in, and it's just one of those things where I was drawn to this pot. And the reason why I was drawn to this pot, I knew the artist. She's my grandmother, Lorencita Pino. And I've seen her make pottery, and I would always ask her, why are you putting animals on it? And why does this pot have a face on it? And she'd giggle and say, well, every artist has a unique way of doing things, their trademark, so to say. And it took me back to my childhood because, during that time, she made pots, and we'd go collect the actual materials off the ground, out of the earth. We work and sift everything. And her thought was, they speak to me, and this is what I envision of this pot, and it's made out of micaceous. And so others know it as a bean pot because I've seen her make bean pots and actually cook beans in it. And so this took me to my childhood right away, and I connected with her. I saw her. I remember how she sat there concentrating on making it. I remember how things were at her house. So that's why I chose this pot, because I have a direct connection to this pot. I've seen others similar to this that she's done, and it just, when I informed my family about doing this, they were blown away too by, wow, grandma's pots are there. I say, yeah, they're there. And so, it made a connection, a family connection, and just knowing that this is a piece of her and her work, the artist whom I've known.
Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing those stories. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Paloma, and she will provide us with the questions from the question and answer session.
Okay, yes, thank you. Thank you all for your wonderful presentation. We do have some questions in the Q&A, and as we go through these, please feel free to add more. We're happy to get to as many as we can. The first question is, and it's, I guess, for anybody who feels like they have the answer to this, Are people allowed to skip wearing gloves if it is culturally appropriate? I've come across this issue during NAGPRA meetings. Thanks.
You want to take that, Stephanie?
Sure, I'll take that. Currently, during COVID, we do require participants to wear gloves at all times while handling. However, pre-pandemic, we leave that option up to the participants. They don't have to wear gloves unless something has been chemically treated. Then, of course, we require them to wear gloves in order to handle that piece. I think that's about it, right, Jen?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, great. This next question is for Mark, Octavius, or Steph, or all three of you if you'd like to answer. And you have sort of touched on this a little bit in your discussion, but Aurelia Fleck wants to know, what are some of the things that community members learned from this review?
Well, I guess finding the artist, like Mark said, what he talked about, that pot was really special for him, and for me, finding that painting and identifying items that people had made in the past, and not knowing if they were artists at all, and then finding pieces there that these individuals have made. So the community here is now aware of some of the items that were made by different people here in Zuni.
Great. Did Mark or Steph, if you have anything to add, or does that cover it, or?
Sure. I'll just kind of add on to what Octavia said. It was always interesting when we did come across a record that had an artist attached to it. We would always try to put together like a family tree of that person's family, just to kind of make sure that we have everyone accurately related to the person that we were talking about. And most of the time is because there was like a mother's pot, but also her daughter's pots were in the collection. And so, and it was always fun to come across people just to get the participants talking and talking about different artists and their work specifically, and then looking at how their techniques, what techniques they use to create their pot, and comparing it to, you know, their children's work or their relatives' work. Overall, in general, I think it was just really fun for the potters to see different techniques that were used by various Acoma potters and that we were able to look at.
Okay, great. This next question, Mark sort of touched upon from the perspective of community participants, but this one, I think maybe it would be interesting to hear from you, Jen. What were some, and Steph, what were some of the initial barriers to beginning this work, and how did you overcome them?
For us, I think one of our initial barriers to doing the collections over a period of years, as we have been able to do them, was frankly, it was funding. We were very fortunate to secure funding from a funder who I'm not going to name because they don't particularly like to be mentioned. That's the only reason, but they have been extremely generous with us and have always provided us what we need to continue doing the reviews. And that's been really, really valuable to the process, because it would have been much more challenging without that support.
And of course, Mark or Octavius, if you have anything to add to barriers on the community participants end, that's always welcome too. Otherwise, I can just move on. Okay. All right. Craig Odinger, I apologize if I've mispronounced your name, asks, how often did you find that the existing SAR collection card contained information that should not have been made public? What sort of information was this, if you find it appropriate to answer the second question? So they're just wondering about what was on the record that maybe should not have been there. Was that a common occurrence?
I guess I'll take that one. Oh,
I
no,
think
go
it
ahead,
was.
Octavius.
Yeah, I think it was, there were some items that were, had wrong information on them. And that's why I keep saying that this process is the process that should be used for museum collections, but because some of the accession information, they're totally off the wall, and we need to make sure that that information is accurate.
Yes, likewise here at Tesuque, we noticed that there wasn't the correct information or half of the information. So yeah, that was some of the stuff that we recognized.
Great. Jen, did you want to add to that, or?
Oh, I just wanted to say that as far as culturally sensitive information, we did find a few records where things were explained that shouldn't have been. And so that information was changed to make, to take out the details that shouldn't be shared with the general public. And I can't really go into what those are, but just to answer that, yes, that did occur in a few instances.
Okay. Beverly Berger has a question for Stephanie. Steph, you mentioned reaching out to the youth for their questions and insights. I think that reaching out to them was a very smart thing to do. Sometimes the intellectuals get stuck, but the young haven't got stuck yet. What was one of the best from them? So I guess just wondering what did you learn from them?
We only had one younger participant who joined us, and he joined us for, I think, maybe 2 or 3 collection reviews. And I guess I'll count myself as the other young potter in this process. I mean, the most valuable part was really just learning, just sitting and listening to everyone, the more experienced potters talk about this. And then, myself or the other gentleman asking them, well, how do you do that? Because, potters, Pueblo people and potters can be kind of stingy from time to time in sharing, like where you can find certain paints, or, how to connect, certain pieces on a jar. And so it's things like that, like techniques on forming certain parts of a jar that you want to know about, or hey, where can we, that's a different color that you don't see anymore, people using it anymore, where can we find this paint at? Just things like that, which were great. And now we have those in our records, not in IRC's records, but certain records that are maintained by the Haku Museum.
Okay, great. Andrea Blasser asks, can you expand on what happens on the day of a review? Is everyone looking at one object at once and discussing it as a group, or are people looking at things independently and recording their own thoughts to be shared later?
I'll take this one. So we're all looking at one object at a time. The whole group is looking at one object, where I read them the record, and then we just start discussing that object, adding information, correcting the record. And then we go through all of the objects that we had picked out for that session one by one.
Great. So Barbara Whitmire asks, what about the community members who are not part of the review process? How do they feel about it, and how much is shared with them after the review? So maybe Octavius, do you want to start with this, and then maybe Mark can add to it? I'm sorry, Octavius, you're muted.
Okay, sorry again. Well, all that information ends up in the museum, and anybody that wants to look at the review or be a part of that can go to the museum and use their things that they have for museum review, monitor, computer, everything that they can use to be a part of that. And that information is stored at the Oshawa Museum.
How about in Tesuque, Mark?
With us, we'll inform those individuals that are parters and interested folks, young folks, in what we've done, the process, so that when they do, when it's their turn to go, they kind of have an idea of how things will unfold as they get there. But everybody seemed to be interested in wanting to go and participate. You know, we too have a diverse group of people that either are potters or painters or artists in their own right, and they were really curious about how and where this all unfolded. And again, it's more so just passing on the information to everybody so they're up to speed, tribal members here at Tesuque.
Great, thank you. Paula Masso, I apologize again if I've mispronounced your name, asks, were any items found that were asked to be returned? Jen, do you want to take this just because you've...
Yeah, yes, there have been some items found that that do fall under NAGPRA, and we'll be working with the involved community on having some of those items returned. Once we identify items that do qualify under NAGPRA, usually the community wants to send in particular cultural representatives that have knowledge of those items. And so due to the pandemic, we've had difficulty being able to make that happen, but it's something that is very high on our list of priorities for the coming year, to finish up those items to make sure that they can go back to where they're needed.
Great, thank you. We have another question that wants to ask again about handling pots without gloves. They ask, couldn't the oil in our hands soak into the pottery, causing negative chemical reactions in the clay? So what do you say to sort of this question and whether or not that is a priority?
Well, we do ask everyone to wash their hands prior to handling any of the collection, should they choose not to wear gloves. But you know, pottery, traditional pottery is very resilient. It ages really well. It does well against the elements. But I'll let someone else speak to that if they'd like to.
I would say that it's
Okay.
Go ahead, Octavius.
Well, Jim and I made sure that we were always wearing gloves, because just the fact that even if you wash your hands, you still get oil coming out. So everything that we touch, this, especially the jewelry, it leaves your fingerprint on, and it'll eventually show up as the years go by. So Jim and I made sure that we were always wearing gloves.
Yeah. I would just say that most participants do elect to wear gloves during the process. That's the most common thing. But occasionally we do make a risk benefit analysis that you know, that a potter may need to actually feel the coils on the inside of a jar and feel exactly what was going on in the construction in order to assess it and make, you know, a good explanation of what was going on with that piece of pottery. And so in order to learn about it, in that case, we do, you know, that individual does need to take off their gloves and be able to touch it. So that did happen on some occasions, but I think it's just a matter of finding balance between access and preservation.
Okay. This is a question I think, Jen, that you can answer. Are the updated collection records for pottery available online?
We have the records available from the Zuni review and the Acoma review are available at this time on our e-museum, and the Tesuque records are almost ready to go up. There's some extra vetting that takes place after the review process to make sure those items are ready for their debut on eMuseum. And so those are undergoing the final stages of that, and they'll be up soon. But yes, that is one of our goals in this process, is to make the resultant information available online. You know, everything that is okay to make available. That can be found at our eMuseum, which you can find through the SAR webpage by going to the IARC webpage, and then there's a link to eMuseum.
Great. Tina Smith asks, can you help find consultants for museums that have collections and would like to have them looked at by community members? So is there a way to sort of make those connections? What was that like initially to sort of reach out to communities? This one maybe is for Jen or Steph.
If other institutions are interested in following, doing a process like this, I'm more than happy to share our contact information of people that have agreed to make their contact information available. But our recommendation would probably be to follow, our similar process, which is to go to tribal leadership and ask them how they would like to engage with this process. We feel like that's the place to start, is with tribal leadership, and then the community can elect on its own if they want to participate in what that will look like for them, because every community is different in how they want to engage.
Great. Let me just see if we have a new question that just came up. Okay, one question I think that for everybody can answer is how can these collections reviews be improved upon, or is there anything that you would do differently or would like to see be done in the future? Maybe we can start with Steph.
Sure. I think we were kind of forced to improve our process just given the pandemic by creating a hybrid format, just by incorporating Zoom. And this allows for anybody who maybe cannot travel or doesn't feel comfortable being around a group of people anymore to still participate in these collection reviews. And I think we're gonna keep this that part, or this hybrid format, from now on, even post-pandemic, which is I think is really good. This allows more people to be involved that can't make it up to see the collection during the review.
Jen, would you like to add to that, or do you have something to add from the perspective of the IARC? Sorry.
Can you review the question one more time?
Yeah, the question was just how can the IARC improve collections reviews? And if there's anything that you would like to see from this process moving forward that maybe we haven't done yet or hasn't been implemented?
I think one of the best ways that we can improve the review is by asking participants, asking them, what can we do to improve? How can we make this a better project for you guys too? Because IARC has, of course, the goals that we mentioned in our presentation, but we want to also make sure that we're meeting the goals of the participating community as well. So I'd actually be curious to turn that question over to Octavius and Mark and see if there are things that they think we could improve upon or do better or build upon for the future.
From my part, I think, as Stephanie mentioned, using the technology for those that can't make it, I think you're already one step ahead, because then that still gives them the opportunity to be a part or participate in what's going on, and those that are wanting to actually see and handle, then they can be there on site to see and handle things. But I think the overall process, as we've experienced, was good. And I think the only improvements that we would need is additional participants from our community would help us out a little bit more, because each of the potters have their own way of doing things. I think we all have a cardinal knowledge about where they collect the materials and what have you. And like Stephanie says, sometimes they're kind of reluctant to say, this is where I found the best this and found the best that. And so, and it does unite all of us. And my takeaway in doing this as a participant was, we learn or we get reintroduced to the tools of the potter, because there are names in Tesuque language that I even forgot. When I mentioned this to the family, I know they were telling me, could you tell about this tool that was used? And I was and I had to ask, well, what is that tool? And it's like it's a wooden tool that helps the potter smooth out things and what have you. So yeah, that was interesting, and I had to remember the name, and so I think what you're doing is good. It's just making sure that we improve on all levels.
Great. Octavius, do you have something to add?
Well, we definitely found other ways of improving on the review. And I think it was about halfway through that we wanted to identify minerals inside the pot. We wanted to make sure if it was ceremonial or it was just a water jar. And so we started thinking of things, and we thought of using a black light. And that really made things jump out, what was in there, the different paints we didn't see inside, minerals still sticking out from the pot. And so with that, the black light, we made a determination of what was used in the ceremony and what was just the water jar. So I think that was a big improvement on our part to look at the inside of pots and actually seeing paint that we never saw before really jump out at us with the black light. So, and that's one thing that I use now when I go to different museums is I got my own black light that I carry with me. So, and other than that, I think what SAR has done is a big improvement, like what I said, for collection review. And I always use them as an example, and how it was done. They were so open and accommodating that things really worked out for us, and all that information now is for the Zuni people and for whoever wants to know about whatever SAR has in their collection.
Great, thank you. Paula Masso asks, do you plan to have other tribes look at the objects in your collections? So Jen, what's the plan long-term here?
Our plan long-term is to execute this project with all of the communities represented in our collection. So I always joke that I'll be like 99 years old before we're done. And I think that's probably about right. But it'll be worth it, if we can have accurate and thorough records that are what the communities want to share with the world. And I think, that will make it entirely worth all the time and the effort. And that'll be kind of the culmination of that goal.
Okay, and Barbara Whitmere asks, and I think this is in reference to the e-museum, about the collection being available digitally, and asks if viewers can turn the pottery or textiles to see the backside. Is there more than one view available?
For a lot of the pottery, we have more than one, well, pottery, other items, sometimes textiles. We do try to have, for pottery, we try to have more than one view available for them. Photography is a rather expensive budget item, so we can't unfortunately do that kind of 3D photography where you get to see the whole pot in the round. I mean, that would be amazing, but we're not there yet. But we are able to make several views of some of the pots available. And with textiles, we try to get a detail of several of them so you can see details of embroidery and that kind of thing. So yeah, we do try to make as many views available as possible.
Great, thanks. I was thinking of that when Octavius was talking about the piece that he was speaking about today. Just when you look at it from another view, you can sort of see the whole image. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I guess that we're gonna wrap up unless any of you would like to say something else or have any questions. I think that has been a great conversation. No? Okay. I just wanted to say thank you again to all of you, Jen, Steph, Octavius, and Mark, for sharing your time and your experience and your knowledge with us. And thank you all to the audience members for joining us today for our final event in this year's speaker series. So thank you all again for joining, and have a good evening.